Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're diving deep into something that always gets people talking.
Oh, yeah.
Privatizing Social Security.
Big one.
Yeah, it's a big one. And honestly, it's one of those things where it seems like everybody's got a strong opinion.
Right.
And, strong opinions are fine, but sometimes you need to take a step back and look at all sides.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do that today and really try to understand, what are the potential risks and rewards? Because this is a big deal.
It is.
This is about your future.
Yeah.
And the choices that we're making today could have, big consequences down the road.
No doubt about it. You're absolutely right. And it's not even just about, will I have enough money to enjoy myself when I retire?
Right.
It really touches on some really fundamental questions about, individual responsibility,
Yeah,
economic stability, and even, what's the role of government? What should the government be doing? What should it not be doing?
exactly. And it's funny you mentioned the role of government because I came across something really interesting when I was doing some research for this deep dive.
Okay.
Some economists, they think that the current system, it actually discourages people from saving for retirement.
Interesting.
They say it reduces personal savings by almost 60%,
Wow.
which is a huge number when you think about it.
It is. Yeah.
And it kind of makes you wonder, if people felt more responsible for their own retirement, would they be more proactive about, putting money aside and maybe even investing it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's actually one of the core arguments that you hear from people who are in favor of privatization.
Right.
The idea is that, if you shift away from this system where the government's guaranteeing you something to a system where it's more in your hands,
You're in control.
you're in control exactly, then maybe people would be more motivated to save and invest.
Makes sense.
And the theory is that this could actually lead to higher returns for people
Right.
and a stronger economy overall. So it's a win-win.
Okay, I see what you're saying, but
Mhm.
but doesn't that also mean that you're basically putting your retirement at the mercy of the stock market?
Uh-huh.
I mean, we all know how volatile that can be.
Yeah.
Even experienced investors,
Yeah.
they get a little shaky when things start going
Oh,
down.
absolutely.
So imagine like your entire retirement savings are tied up in stocks and suddenly the market takes a nosedive.
Right.
That's got to be a little bit nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah, no, you're hitting on the real trade-off here.
Okay.
Right, the potential for higher rewards with privatization, it definitely comes with accepting more risk. That's just the nature of the beast.
Right.
But those who support this approach, they argue that, in the long run, the stock market tends to go up,
Okay.
even though there's going to be dips along the way.
For ups and downs.
Yeah, exactly. The ups and downs are inevitable, but they say those potential long-term gains, they're worth the risk.
I get that, and I see the logic there. But what about people who just aren't comfortable with that much risk? Or, maybe they don't really know a lot about investing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's a real chance that some people could end up in a bad spot.
Yeah, you're bringing up a key concern that critics of privatization often raise.
Okay.
They worry that it could actually make things even more unequal,
Okay.
right? So the people who are already good with money, they understand investments, they have the resources to really invest wisely,
Hmm.
they'll probably do great.
Yeah.
But the folks who aren't as familiar with investing or maybe are just more cautious by nature.
Risk averse.
Yeah, exactly. They
Yeah.
could actually end up worse off.
It's almost like saying, your financial security in retirement depends on how good you are at playing the stock market,
Yeah.
which is a little scary when you think about it.
It's a valid concern, and it really highlights the need to think carefully about how a privatized system would work. How would it actually address the needs of those who are more vulnerable?
Yeah.
The people who might need a little extra help.
Right.
The folks who support privatization, they'll argue that with the right safeguards in place, with good education resources, everyone could benefit.
Okay.
But, critics, they're still skeptical.
Yeah.
They say the risks are just too high for certain groups of people.
Now, one group that I'm particularly curious about is women.
Okay.
Because, I was reading that on average, women tend to live longer than men,
Mm-hmm.
and they often have lower lifetime earnings.
Right.
So would a privatized system be able to handle those unique challenges?
That's a great question, and it's a really important one because women often face this double whammy when it comes to retirement.
Yeah.
They need their savings to last longer,
Right.
but they often start off with less.
Exactly.
So any privatized system would have to take those factors into account
Yeah.
to make sure that women aren't being put at a disadvantage.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the good stuff, Yeah, like maybe higher returns and more control over your own money.
Mm-hmm.
But we've also talked about some pretty serious risks, especially for certain folks.
Right.
But what about the big picture? Like, how could privatizing Social Security affect the entire economy, not just individuals?
Oh, man. That's where things get really interesting
Sure.
because now we have to think about not just what happens to one person,
Right.
but how all those individual decisions could ripple out and affect the whole system.
Okay.
So, on the one hand, you could argue that if the government's not so involved in retirement planning anymore,
Okay.
you could have a leaner, more efficient system.
Right.
And that could actually be good for economic growth.
Okay. Less government, less red tape.
Yeah, exactly. But there's another side to consider.
Okay.
What happens if a lot of people suddenly lose a big chunk of their retirement savings because the market crashes?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's the flip side of the coin.
So you're saying if everybody's retirement accounts take a hit at the same time, that could have a domino effect on the whole economy.
Exactly, because suddenly people have less money to spend.
Yeah.
They start tightening their belts. Businesses suffer. Unemployment could go up.
That's a scary thought.
It's a classic example of how what seems like an individual financial decision
Mhm.
can actually have huge consequences for everyone.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about what can happen to government programs.
Right.
Like if people are struggling to make ends meet in retirement,
Yeah.
they might need more help from, social safety net programs.
Exactly.
And that could put even more strain on those systems.
Absolutely. It's all connected. You can't just look at one piece of the puzzle in isolation.
Yeah,
You got to see the whole
it's
picture.
like a giant web.
Yeah, giant web.
And you tug on one thread and it affects the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest challenges with this whole idea of privatizing Social Security.
Okay.
How do you manage those risks, without losing the potential benefits?
So basically we're talking about a very delicate balancing act. That's a great way to put it, yeah.
And I'm guessing there's no easy answer.
If there were, it wouldn't be such a hot topic.
Right.
And to make things even more complicated, there's the financial side of things to consider.
Oh, okay.
Any transition to a privatized system would probably be incredibly expensive.
How expensive are we talking?
We're talking potentially trillions of dollars.
Trillions with a T.
Yeah, with a T.
Wow, how is that even possible?
Well, think about it. The government would still have to pay benefits to everyone who's already retired
Right.
or who's getting close to retirement under the current system.
Okay.
But if people aren't paying into Social Security anymore,
Right.
the government has to find that money somewhere.
So they'd be paying for two systems at once.
Essentially, yes.
And that means going into a lot of debt.
It could, yeah. And that has its own set of consequences down the road.
Right. So it seems like we really need to think about whether the potential benefits of privatization are really worth the risks and the costs.
Yeah. I mean, even if we could figure out a way to make it fair for everyone,
Right.
just the financial hurdle alone seems pretty daunting.
Yeah. It's a complex equation with a lot of moving parts.
Okay.
And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Well, it sounds like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much to consider, from the impact on individuals
Mhm.
to the big macroeconomic consequences.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations,
Yeah.
to really weigh different perspectives
Yeah.
and to think critically about, what are the long-term implications of any big policy changes?
Well, before we go too far down that rabbit hole,
Okay.
I want to bring it back to our listener for a minute.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground here, both sides of the privatization debate.
Yeah.
But what does all of this mean for the average person who's just trying to plan for their future?
Right.
What are some key takeaways they can use to navigate this whole complex landscape?
I think the most important thing to remember is that no matter what happens with Social Security,
Okay.
you got to be proactive about your own financial well-being.
Mm.
You can't just rely on one system or program.
So even if Social Security stays the way it is, we shouldn't just assume it'll be enough to live on in retirement.
Exactly. It's wise to think of Social Security as one piece of the puzzle,
Okay.
but not the whole picture.
Right.
Take steps to build your own financial safety net.
Okay. How do we do that?
Well, there's lots of ways, you can save, you can invest, and there are other retirement planning strategies out there.
So it's about taking control.
Yeah, taking
Yeah.
ownership of your financial future.
No matter what happens with the policy stuff.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power.
Okay.
The more you understand about the different options out there,
Hmm.
the better decisions you'll be able to make for yourself.
Decisions that fit your own situation and your goals.
That's the key.
Now, we've talked a lot about the economic and social implications of all this. But I'm also curious about the philosophical side of things.
Okay.
It seems like this whole debate really boils down to some pretty deep questions about individual versus collective responsibility.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of what kind of society we want to be.
Right.
It forces us to ask, what's the role of government?
Mm.
Should we be focusing on individual freedom and self-reliance, even if it means some people might fall through the cracks?
Or should we be trying to create a system where everyone has at least a basic level of security?
Yeah.
Even if it means the government has to be more involved.
It's a tough question.
It is.
And there's no easy answer.
It really comes down to values, doesn't it?
It does. Different people have different values and priorities.
And there's no right or wrong answer?
Not necessarily. It's about deciding what kind of world we want to live in.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
The potential benefits and risks of privatizing Social Security,
Right.
the economic implications,
Mm-hmm.
the philosophical questions it raises.
It's a big topic.
It's a huge topic, and clearly there's no simple solution.
Absolutely not.
But hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
That's the goal.
And maybe some tools to help you engage in this debate in a more informed way and to make smart decisions about your own financial future.
Absolutely.
I think you've given our listeners a lot to chew on here.
I hope so.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
If Social Security were to be privatized, what safeguards would you want to see put in place?
What would need to happen to make sure that everybody has a shot at a secure retirement, no matter who they are or how much they know about investing?
It's a question worth thinking about
It is.
as we navigate this complex and constantly changing world.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations of the issues that matter most.
Yes, stick with us.
See you next time.
Bye.
Okay, less government, less red tape. I mean, usually that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, in theory, it makes sense. The idea is that you free up resources, get rid of some of the bureaucracy.
Right.
And that could unleash more economic potential.
Okay.
But there's a flip side. You got to think about, what happens if a whole bunch of people lose a big chunk of their retirement savings because the market tanks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
If everybody's retirement accounts take a hit at the same time, wouldn't that send shockwaves through the whole economy?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
People wouldn't have as much money to spend.
Right.
Businesses would suffer. Unemployment could go up.
That's a real concern.
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. And what's even scarier is we haven't even talked about what could happen to government programs.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because if people are struggling to make ends meet in retirement.
They might need to rely more on those safety net programs.
Exactly. And that could put a huge strain on those systems.
So it's like this giant tangled web
It is.
where everything's connected.
Yeah, you can't just isolate one piece. You got to look at the whole picture.
And this is what makes privatizing Social Security so tricky.
Yeah.
Because how do you manage all those potential risks without undermining the potential benefits?
It's a tough one.
Sounds like a really delicate balancing act.
It is a delicate balancing act, no doubt about it.
And I'm guessing there's no easy solution.
I wish there were.
Right.
If there were an easy solution, we wouldn't be having this. But if people aren't paying into Social Security anymore.
Where's the money going to come from?
Exactly. So the government would have to find a way to cover those costs.
So they'd basically be paying for two sisters at the same time.
Essentially, yeah.
Which means going into a whole lot of debt.
It could, yeah. And that has its own set of consequences down the road.
Okay, so now we're talking about, potential benefits of privatization, but also some pretty big risks and costs.
Right.
Even if we could figure out a way to make it fair for everybody.
Just the sheer financial hurdle seems pretty massive.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
There are a lot of moving parts here.
And no easy answers.
No easy answer.
Well, it definitely sounds like we've only just scratched the surface of this whole issue.
Oh, yeah, we've just dipped our toes in.
There's so much to consider, from the impact on individuals to the big picture economic consequences.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to
Right.
really dig into the different perspectives and to think critically about the long-term implications of any big policy changes.
Well, before we get too lost in the weeds here,
Okay.
I want to bring it back to our listener for a minute.
That's good.
We've talked about both sides of the privatization debate.
We have.
But what does all of this actually mean for the average person who's trying to plan for their future?
Right.
What are some key takeaways they can use to navigate this whole complex landscape?
I think the most important takeaway is that no matter what happens with Social Security,
Oh, okay.
you gotta be proactive about your own financial well-being.
You can't just sit back and wait and see what happens.
Exactly. You can't just rely on one system or program.
So even if Social Security stays the way it is,
Right.
we shouldn't just assume it'll be enough to live on in retirement.
That's right. It's wise to think of Social Security as one piece of the puzzle,
Okay.
but not the whole picture.
So we need to build our own safety net.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Take steps to build your own financial safety net.
How do we do that?
Well, there are a lot of ways, you can save, you can invest. There are other retirement planning strategies out there.
So it's about taking control,
Yeah, taking ownership of your financial future.
no matter what happens with the policy stuff.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power.
Okay.
The more you understand about the different options that are out there.
The better decisions you'll be able to make for yourself.
Exactly. Decisions that fit your own situation and your own goals.
That makes sense. Now, we've talked a lot about the economic and social implications of all of this,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm also curious about the philosophical side of things.
Okay.
It seems like this whole debate really boils down to some pretty deep questions
It does.
about individual responsibility versus collective responsibility.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of what kind of society we want to be.
Right.
It forces us to ask, what is the role of government?
Yeah.
Should we be prioritizing individual freedom and self-reliance,
Okay.
even if it means some people might fall through the cracks?
Or should we be trying to create a system where everybody has at least a basic level of security?
Even if it means more government involvement?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it's a really tough question.
There's no easy answer.
No, there isn't.
It really comes down to values, doesn't it?
It really does. Different people have different values, different priorities.
And there's no right or wrong answer necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. It's about deciding what kind of world we want to live in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about, figuring out what matters most to you and what kind of world we want to build together.
So we've talked about, the economic side of things, the social impact of privatizing Social Security.
Uh-huh.
But it seems like at its core, this whole debate is really about, some fundamental philosophical questions.
It is. Yeah, it really is.
Like individual responsibility versus collective responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And those are tough questions.
They are.
There are no easy answers.
And I think the answers might be different for different people.
Of course, yeah. People's values and beliefs play a big role.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've looked at the potential benefits and risks of privatizing Social Security, the economic implications, and even the philosophical questions that it raises.
It's a big topic.
It is a huge topic, and it's one that's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's going to be with us for a while.
But hopefully this deep dive has given you the information you need
That's the goal.
to really understand the issue and to make informed decisions about your own financial future.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, that's what really matters.
Well, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about.
I hope so.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay?
If Social Security were to be privatized, what safeguards would you want to see?
What would need to be in place to make sure that everyone has a fair chance at a secure retirement?
Regardless of, their background or how much they know about investing.
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it?
It is.
How do we make sure that everyone benefits?
It's something to think about as we move forward.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And don't forget to subscribe for more thought-provoking explorations of the issues that matter most.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.